The wagon train disappeared into the shimmering heat of the Utah desert, leaving Josephine Crawford standing alone with nothing but a carpetbag, a canteen, and the crushing weight of rejection pressing against her chest like a physical thing. She had asked too many questions, they said. Wanted to know why they were taking the southern route when storms were predicted, why they were rationing water so strictly when there was supposedly a creek ahead, why the scout kept changing his story about the distance to the next settlement. The wagon master had tolerated her inquiries for 3 days before his patience snapped like a dry twig. This morning, he had simply pointed to the rocky outcropping ahead and told her that Parowan was 15 miles north, that she could walk it by nightfall if she kept a steady pace, and that her constant questioning was disrupting the harmony of their party. Her aunt and uncle, with whom she had been traveling, had looked away in shame but said nothing in her defense. The decision was final. Now, watching the dust settle on the horizon, Josephine felt the first real stirrings of fear. It was August of 1876. The sun was merciless, and she was a 22-year-old woman alone in country that did not forgive mistakes. She adjusted her bonnet, picked up her bag, and started walking north. What choice did she have? The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like the bones of ancient giants, and scrub brush clung to life in impossible places. The heat was intense, but Josephine had grown up in Missouri, where summers could be brutal, and she knew how to pace herself. She took small sips from her canteen and kept her eyes on the distant mountains, using them as a landmark. 15 miles. She could do 15 miles, except the wagon master had lied or been mistaken, or simply wanted to be rid of her badly enough that accuracy did not matter. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances, Josephine had not seen any sign of civilization. Her feet ached, her water was nearly gone, and the temperature was finally dropping to something bearable. She kept walking. Darkness came swiftly in the desert, and with it came cold that seemed impossible after the day's heat. Josephine wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and continued north, guided by starlight and stubbornness. She had always been stubborn. It was what got her into this mess, her mother would have said. Her mother, who had died 2 years ago, leaving Josephine with no choice but to accept her uncle's grudging offer to bring her west to California, where he planned to open a dry goods store. That plan seemed very far away now. She was considering whether to rest for a few hours or push through the night when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Josephine's heart jumped into her throat. Travelers at night could mean salvation or danger, and there was no way to know which until it was too late to run. She stood still, trying to make herself small, but the rider had already spotted her. "Hello there," a male voice called out, cautious but not threatening. "You lost?" Josephine swallowed hard. "I am making my way to Parowan," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was told it was 15 miles from where my wagon train left me this morning." 15 miles. The rider came closer, and in the moonlight, Josephine could make out a tall man on a dark horse, wearing a hat with a wide brim. "Someone gave you bad information, miss. Parowan is a good 35 miles from the main trail. You are not even close." The words hit her like a physical blow. 35 miles. She had walked all day and had barely made a dent in the distance. Josephine felt her knees go weak, but she locked them straight through sheer force of will. She would not collapse in front of a stranger. "I see," she managed. "Then I had better keep walking, in the dark, without knowing the way." The man dismounted and Josephine tensed, but he kept a respectful distance. That is a good way to break an ankle or worse. There are ravines out here that you would not see until you were falling into them. What do you suggest then? Josephine heard the edge in her own voice, the fear turning to anger. "I cannot very well stay out here." "No, you cannot." He paused, and she could feel him assessing the situation. "My ranch is about 5 miles east. You can stay there tonight, get a proper meal and some rest. In the morning, I will take you into Parowan myself." Every instinct Josephine had screamed that accepting help from a strange man in the middle of nowhere was dangerous, potentially fatal. But what alternative did she have? Walk through the night and risk falling into a ravine, as he had said? Sit here and wait for morning, using up what little energy she had left? "How do I know you are telling the truth?" she asked. "How do I know you have a ranch at all, or that you mean me no harm?" Even in the darkness, she could see his posture shift, could hear something like respect in his voice when he answered. "You do not know. You are right to be cautious. My name is Thomas Cartwright. I run cattle on about 300 acres east of here. I am riding back from delivering some stock to a buyer in Cedar City. I am tired, my horse is tired, and I want to get home. I do not have any interest in hurting you, but I understand that you have no reason to believe me." Josephine bit her lip, thinking, why were you on this path? If you came from Cedar City, would you not take the main road? "There she is," Thomas said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "The woman who asks questions. I cut across because it is shorter, and because I know this land like the back of my hand. The main road loops south to avoid some rough terrain." "Were you riding with anyone else?" "No, just me." "Why were you selling cattle in August? Is that not typically a spring activity?" "Usually yes, but the buyer needed them for a special contract. Are you satisfied, or do you have more questions?" Josephine straightened her shoulders. "I will always have more questions. If that bothers you, you can leave me here." There was a long silence, and then Thomas laughed. It was a warm sound, genuine and surprised. "Miss, I do not think I have ever met anyone quite like you. Come on. Let us get you to the ranch before we both freeze to death out here." He offered to let her ride while he walked, but Josephine refused. They compromised by sharing the horse, with Josephine sitting behind him, her carpetbag secured to the saddle. She held onto the back of the saddle rather than putting her arms around his waist, maintaining what propriety she could under the circumstances. As they rode, Thomas talked. It seemed natural to him, filling the silence with information, and Josephine was grateful for it. He told her about the ranch, which he had inherited from his father 3 years ago when he was 25. He ran a small operation, mostly cattle with some horses, and employed 2 hands who helped with the heavy work. His father had died of pneumonia, his mother had passed when he was young, and he had a sister who had married and moved to Salt Lake City. "What about you?" he asked. "How does a woman end up alone in the desert asking questions that get her thrown off a wagon train?" Josephine told him the story, and in the telling, felt the humiliation of it fresh. "I suppose they were right that I was disruptive," she admitted. "But the wagon master was making poor decisions. Someone needed to speak up. And that someone was you. No one else was going to do it." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "For what it is worth, you were probably right about the southern route. There were bad storms last week. If they kept going that way, they might have run into trouble." It was a small vindication, but Josephine felt it warm her nevertheless. The ranch house appeared as a dark shape against the stars, larger than Josephine had expected. As they drew closer, she could make out a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. Thomas called out as they approached, and a lantern flared to life in the barn. A man emerged, weathered and bow-legged. "Boss, we were starting to worry." "Just took longer than expected, Charlie. This is Miss Crawford. She needs a place to stay for the night. I will explain in the morning." Charlie looked at Josephine with undisguised curiosity but nodded. "I will take care of the horse. You get her inside. It is colder than a banker's heart out here." The ranch house was simple but well maintained. Thomas lit several lamps, revealing a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. Everything was neat, almost sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and did not see the point in unnecessary decoration. "You can have my room," Thomas said, moving to the fireplace to build up the fire. "I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Josephine protested. "You can and you will. I am not going to have you sleep on the floor or the couch after the day you have had." He looked at her, his face serious in the lamplight. "You are safe here, Miss Crawford. I give you my word." Josephine studied him in the light for the first time. Thomas Cartwright was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed a trim and a face that was more interesting than handsome. His eyes were a light color, gray or blue, and they met hers directly. There was something steady about him, something that made her want to trust him despite her better judgment. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. I know you did not have to help me." "No, I did not. But what kind of man would I be if I left a woman alone in the desert?" He turned back to the fire, adding another log. "Are you hungry?" She was starving, she realized. She had eaten the last of her bread at midday and nothing since. "Yes." Thomas moved to the kitchen area and started pulling out supplies. "It will not be fancy, but I can make some beans and bacon, some cornbread. There is coffee if you want it. Can I help? Do you know how to cook?" "Of course I know how to cook." He glanced at her, something like amusement in his expression. "Then yes, you can help." They worked together in companionable silence, and Josephine found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Thomas moved with the easy competence of a man used to taking care of himself, and he did not hover or try to do everything himself once she made it clear she was capable. They talked while they cooked, the conversation flowing naturally. He asked about her life in Missouri, about her family, about what she hoped to find in California. She asked about ranching, about the challenges of running a place alone, about life in Utah territory. "You always ask this many questions." Thomas asked at one point, but his tone was curious rather than annoyed. "Yes," Josephine said simply. "I like to understand things. I like to know how the world works. Is that so terrible?" "Not terrible at all. Just unusual. Most people are content to accept things as they are." "Well, I am not most people." "No," Thomas agreed, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You certainly are not." They ate at the simple wooden table, and the food tasted better than anything Josephine could remember. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or the relief of being safe and warm, but every bite was delicious. Thomas was good company, easy to talk to, and Josephine found herself laughing at his stories about stubborn cattle and mishaps on the ranch. It felt startlingly normal, sitting here with this stranger as if they had known each other for years rather than hours. After dinner, Thomas showed her to his room, which was as simple as the rest of the house. A bed, a dresser, a chair. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said from the doorway. "Sleep as late as you need. We will head into Parowan whenever you are ready." "Thank you, Thomas," Josephine said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "You are welcome, Josephine. Good night." She slept deeply and dreamlessly, wrapped in quilts that smelled like sage and sun. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains, and she could hear voices outside. Josephine dressed quickly, did her best to make herself presentable, and emerged to find Thomas in the kitchen with Charlie and another man, younger with red hair. "Miss Crawford," Thomas said, standing. "This is Charlie Dawson and Henry Reid. They help me run the place." Both men tipped their hats respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, miss," Charlie said. "Boss told us what happened. That is a rough bit of luck." "It is kind of you to say so," Josephine replied. Thomas had made breakfast eggs, bacon, biscuits, and they all ate together. Josephine was aware of the men's curiosity, but appreciated that they did not pry. After breakfast, Thomas saddled a fresh horse and helped Josephine mount. She rode properly this time, using a saddle with her carpet bag secured behind her. The ride to Parowan took about 3 hours, following a trail that wound through increasingly green country. Thomas pointed out landmarks, told her the names of plants and animals they passed, answered her endless questions with patience that seemed inexhaustible. As they crested a ridge and the town spread out below them, small but bustling with activity, Josephine felt a strange reluctance settle in her chest. "There it is," Thomas said. "Parowan. It is not much, but folks are friendly for the most part." They rode down into the town, past houses and shops and a church. People looked at them with interest, and Josephine was aware of how this must look a strange woman riding in with Thomas Cartwright. Thomas seemed unconcerned. He led them to a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Sarah Brennan, a widow in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense manner. "I need a room," Josephine told her, "just for a few days while I figure out what to do next." Mrs. Brennan looked her over, then looked at Thomas. "She is respectable, completely," Thomas said firmly. "She got separated from her wagon train. She needs a safe place to stay." $2 a week, meals included, Mrs. Brennan said. "Payment in advance." Josephine paid, grateful that she still had the money her uncle had given her for emergencies. Thomas helped her carry her bag up to the small but clean room on the second floor. "What will you do now?" he asked. Josephine sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted again. "I do not know. Try to get word to my aunt and uncle, I suppose. Find another wagon train heading to California. Work until I can afford passage." She looked up at him. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not come along." Thomas shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they would not have." "You know that as well as I do." He met her eyes and nodded slowly. "Well, I should get back to the ranch. If you need anything at all, you can send word. Parowan is not that far." "I will, thank you." He left, and Josephine felt his absence like a physical thing. She told herself she was being foolish. She had known the man for less than 24 hours, but there had been something there, some connection she could not quite name. She shook her head and started unpacking her bag. She had more important things to worry about than a kind cowboy with patient eyes. Over the next few days, Josephine tried to establish herself in Parowan. She sent a letter to her aunt, an uncle in care of the general delivery in San Bernardino, where the wagon train had been headed, explaining what had happened and where she was. She visited the local store and asked about wagon trains heading west. The proprietor, a man named Mr. Dalton, told her that most of the season's trains had already passed through, but there might be one more in a few weeks. "What will you do until then?" he asked. "Work if I can find it," Josephine said. Mr. Dalton scratched his chin. "Tell you what. My wife has been after me to hire someone to help in the store. She cannot keep up with it all, and I need her help with the books. Would you be interested?" Josephine accepted immediately. The pay was modest, but it was honest work, and it would keep her fed and housed while she waited. She started the next day, learning the inventory, helping customers, keeping the store clean and organized. Mrs. Dalton, a cheerful woman with graying hair, took to her immediately. "You are so quick to learn," she said approvingly. "And you ask good questions. I like a girl who pays attention." It was the first time in Josephine's life that her curiosity had been praised rather than criticized, and it warmed her. She had been working at the store for 3 days when Thomas came back to town. Josephine was restocking shelves when the bell above the door rang, and she turned to see him walk in. Her heart did a strange little jump in her chest. "Thomas," she said, and heard the pleasure in her own voice. "Josephine." He smiled at her, that transformative smile that made him look younger. "How are you settling in?" "Well, I think. I found work here at the store. Mr. and Mrs. Dalton have been very kind." "That is good. I am glad." He moved closer, holding his hat in his hands. "I came to check on you, make sure you were all right." "You rode all the way to town just to check on me." "I had some other business too," he said, but the tips of his ears had gone red, and Josephine felt something flutter in her chest. They talked for a few minutes, the conversation easy and natural, as if no time had passed since that night at his ranch. Mrs. Dalton watched them with interest, but she said nothing. When Thomas left, promising to stop by again soon, Mrs. Dalton came over to where Josephine was standing, still watching the door. "That Thomas Cartwright is a good man," she said casually. "Lost his father a few years back, been running that ranch all by himself ever since. Works hard, never causes trouble, treats people right. He is a catch, that one." Josephine felt her cheeks heat. "We barely know each other, Mrs. Dalton." "Sometimes that is all it takes," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "One look and you just know." Josephine did not reply, but she thought about Thomas's words all day. He had ridden to town just to check on her. The knowledge sat warm and glowing in her chest. Thomas came back to town 2 days later, and then 3 days after that. Each time he found a reason: supplies he needed, business at the bank, a friend to visit, but he always ended up at the store, talking to Josephine. They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, and Josephine found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that would have alarmed her if she had stopped to think about it. One afternoon, as she was helping him select some supplies, Thomas said, "There is a dance on Saturday night. The town has them once a month. Would you like to go? With me, I mean." Josephine's hand stilled on the bag of flour she was holding. "Are you asking me to accompany you to a dance, Thomas Cartwright?" "I am. If you want to, that is, no pressure." She looked at him, at the hope and nervousness in his eyes, and felt something in her chest expand and bloom. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." His smile could have lit the whole store. "Good, that is good. I will pick you up at 7. Saturday came, and Josephine spent far too much time getting ready. She had one good dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and she arranged her dark hair as best she could without a proper mirror. When Thomas arrived at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house, wearing clean clothes and looking nervous, Mrs. Brennan opened the door with a smile. "You two have a wonderful time," she said. "Josephine, do not stay out too late." The dance was held in the church hall, which had been decorated with wildflowers and paper lanterns. Music filled the air, provided by a fiddle player, a man with a guitar, and a woman on piano. The room was crowded with townspeople, all dressed in their best, and the atmosphere was festive. Thomas introduced Josephine to what seemed like half the town, and she tried to remember names and faces. When the dancing started, Thomas led her onto the floor with a confidence that surprised her. He was a good dancer, light on his feet, and Josephine found herself laughing as they whirled through a reel. Between dances, they drank punch and talked, and Josephine realized that she was happier than she had been in months, possibly years. "Are you glad you asked me?" she said during a slow dance, feeling bold. Thomas looked down at her, his gray eyes serious. "Gladder than I can say." "Are you glad you said yes?" "Very glad." She hesitated, then asked, "Thomas, why did you come back to check on me?" "Really?" He was quiet for a moment, and they swayed to the music. Because I could not stop thinking about you, he said finally. From the moment you refused to stop asking questions even when you were alone and scared in the desert, I knew you were someone special. Someone I wanted to know better. Josephine's breath caught. I could not stop thinking about you either. They danced closer after that, and Josephine let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to stay in Parowan, to build a life here, to see Thomas every day instead of waiting anxiously for his visits. But reality intruded as the evening wore on. A woman approached them between dances, elegant and blonde with a tight smile. Thomas Cartwright, as I live and breathe. I heard you finally found yourself a girl. Took you long enough. Thomas's expression shuddered. Hello, Margaret. Josephine, this is Margaret Foster. We knew each other growing up. We were engaged once, Margaret said sweetly. Did Thomas tell you? Of course, that was before he decided ranch life was more important than giving a woman the life she deserved. Josephine felt the barb, saw the flicker of pain in Thomas's eyes. Ranch life seems quite honorable to me, she said coolly. It takes a strong man to build something with his own hands. Margaret's smile tightened. How quaint. Well, enjoy your evening. She swept away, leaving tension in her wake. I am sorry about that, Thomas said quietly. Do not be. Is it true? Were you engaged 4 years ago? She wanted me to sell the ranch and move to Salt Lake City. I could not do it. The ranch was my father's legacy. I could not just abandon it. Josephine reached for his hand. You made the right choice. If she could not see that, then she did not deserve you. Thomas squeezed her hand, gratitude clear in his face. They danced the rest of the evening, and when he walked her back to the boarding house, he kissed her cheek gently. Thank you for tonight, Josephine, for understanding. Thank you for asking me. Thomas, I need to tell you something. I am not staying in Parowan permanently. I am waiting for a wagon train to California. When it comes, I will have to go. His face fell, but he nodded. I knew that. But that does not mean we cannot enjoy the time we have, does it? No, Josephine whispered. It does not. The days that followed were both wonderful and bittersweet. Thomas came to town as often as he could, and they spent every possible moment together. He taught her to ride better, took her out to see the ranch again, introduced her to the rhythms of his life. She told him about her dreams of California, her hope to maybe start a business of her own someday, a dress shop or perhaps a school. He listened to everything she said with complete attention, never dismissing her ideas, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was really considering her words. You would be a wonderful teacher, he said one afternoon as they sat by a creek on his property, the water bubbling over smooth stones. You have the patience for it, and the curiosity. You would inspire students to think for themselves. You really think so? I know so. He plucked a stem of grass and twirled it between his fingers. Josephine, can I ask you something? You know you can ask me anything. I appreciate questions, remember. He smiled at that, but his expression turned serious. Why is California so important to you? What is there that you cannot find here? Josephine thought about it, watching the water flow past. Opportunity, I suppose. A chance to be more than someone's dependent. My uncle was going to let me work in his store, but I would have been beholden to him forever. In California, everything is new. I could make my own way. You could make your own way here, Thomas said quietly. If you wanted to. Her heart hammered in her chest. Thomas, I am not asking you to decide right now, he said quickly. I just want you to know that there are possibilities here too if you were interested. They did not speak more about it that day, but his words haunted Josephine. She found herself imagining what it would be like to stay, to let herself fall completely into whatever this thing was growing between them. But fear held her back. She had been so certain about California, about starting over somewhere new. Could she really give that up for a man she had known for such a short time? The answer came one afternoon when she was working at the store. A man came in, dusty from travel, asking Mr. Dalton about supplies for a wagon train. Josephine's ears perked up immediately. "You are with a wagon train?" she asked. "Yes, miss. We are passing through, heading to California, leaving in 3 days." Josephine felt everything inside her go still. "Do you have room for another passenger? We might. You would have to talk to our wagon master, but we could probably fit you in." After the man left, Josephine stood behind the counter, feeling numb. This was what she had been waiting for. Her chance to get to California, to continue the journey that had been interrupted. She should be thrilled. Instead, she felt sick. Mrs. Dalton came over and put a gentle hand on her arm. "You do not have to go, dear. I know, but this is what I planned, what I have been waiting for." Plans change, life changes, you should follow your heart. "What if my heart is wrong? What if I stay and regret it?" Mrs. Dalton smiled sadly. "What if you go and regret it? There is risk either way, Josephine, but let me ask you this. When you think about the future, what do you see?" "Really see?" Josephine closed her eyes. When she thought about the future, she saw Thomas. She saw the ranch, a home they built together, children running through the yard, growing old side by side. The vision was so clear and strong it took her breath away. But was it real, or just a pretty fantasy? She did not tell Thomas about the wagon train that evening when he came by. She could not bear to see the hope die in his eyes. Instead, they walked through the town as the sun set, painting everything gold and orange, and talked about nothing important. He held her hand, and Josephine memorized the feeling of his calloused palm against hers. "You are quiet tonight," Thomas observed. "Just tired, I think." He studied her face in the dying light. "Are you sure that is all? Thomas, can I ask you something? Anything. Always anything. Do you believe in love at first sight? In knowing someone is right for you even when logic says it is too soon?" Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I do. I think sometimes your soul recognizes something before your head catches up. Why do you ask?" Josephine looked at him, at this good, patient, wonderful man who had saved her life and then changed it completely. "Because I think I am falling in love with you, and it terrifies me." The smile that spread across Thomas's face was like the sun coming up. "It terrifies me too," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "But I am falling in love with you as well, Josephine Crawford. I have been since the moment you refused to stop asking questions in the middle of the desert." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Josephine felt something click into place inside her. This was right. This was what she had been looking for without knowing it. "There is a wagon train leaving in 3 days," she whispered against his lips. "They have room for me." Thomas went very still. "Are you going to take it?" "I do not want to. Thomas, I want to stay. I want to see where this goes, but I am so afraid of making the wrong choice." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Josephine, I cannot promise you that staying will be easy. Ranch life is hard. There will be lean years and good years. There will be times when money is tight and times when everything goes wrong at once. But I can promise you this. I will never tell you to stop asking questions. I will never make you feel small for being curious or intelligent or yourself. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. If you stay, I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears filled Josephine's eyes. "That is all I have ever wanted, to be accepted for who I am." "Then stay. Please stay." "Yes," Josephine said, the word coming out as a sob and a laugh all at once. "Yes, I will stay. I will stay with you." Thomas lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Josephine felt her future rearrange itself into something even better than she had imagined. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, talking rapidly about the future. Thomas wanted to marry her, he said, as soon as possible if she was willing. Josephine said yes before he even finished asking. They would have a small wedding, just friends and neighbors. She would move to the ranch, help him run it. Maybe they could expand, take on more cattle, build the place into something really special. Maybe they could start a family. I want children, Josephine said. At least 2 or 3. I want as many as you are willing to give me, Thomas replied. I want our house to be full of noise and love and questions. So many questions. Mrs. Brennan cried when Josephine told her the news the next morning. I knew it, she said, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. From the moment I saw you two together, I knew it. Oh, Josephine, I am so happy for you. Mr. and Mrs. Dalton were equally delighted. We will miss you at the store, Mrs. Dalton said, but we are so pleased you are staying in Parowan. You belong here now. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Brennan had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Thomas wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and so full of love that Josephine's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that made several women in the audience sigh audibly. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, and Josephine felt like she was floating. The reception was held at the church hall, with food contributed by half the town and music provided by the same musicians who had played at the dance, where they had first danced together. Josephine danced with her new husband, laughing and breathless with happiness. Thomas could not seem to stop smiling. Happy, he murmured in her ear during a slow dance. Happier than I knew it was possible to be, she replied honestly. They left the reception as the sun was setting, riding together back to the ranch. Thomas had told Charlie and Henry to make themselves scarce for the night, giving him and Josephine complete privacy. As they rode up to the house, Josephine felt a moment of nervousness. She was a married woman now. Everything had changed. Thomas must have sensed her tension because he helped her down from the horse with extra gentleness and said, "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for, Josephine. We have all the time in the world." "I know," she said. "I trust you, Thomas, completely." He carried her over the threshold, which made her laugh, and set her down gently in the main room. The house looked different somehow, warmer and more welcoming, and Josephine realized it was because Thomas had tried to make it special for her. There were wildflowers in a vase on the table, candles burning, everything extra clean. "You did this for me. I wanted you to feel welcome. This is your home now, Josephine, our home." She turned to him, this good man who had saved her and loved her and promised her a lifetime of questions and answers. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what it means to be your wife." He did, with patience and tenderness and so much love that Josephine wept with the beauty of it. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs, she felt a peace she had never known before. This was where she belonged. Not California, not Missouri, but right here with Thomas. "No regrets?" he asked softly, stroking her hair. "Not a single one. You." "How could I have regrets when I have everything I ever wanted?" They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and when Josephine woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the window and Thomas's arm around her waist, she smiled. This was her life now. This was her future. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Josephine had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, the way every day brought new challenges. But she threw herself into it with the same curiosity and determination that had gotten her thrown off a wagon train, and she found that she loved it. She loved caring for the animals, loved the physical work that left her tired but satisfied at the end of each day, loved working alongside Thomas to build something together. Charlie and Henry accepted her easily, treating her with respect and gradually warming into genuine affection. She cooked for them, tended their minor injuries, and listened to their stories. In return, they taught her ranch skills and made her feel like part of the family. Thomas was everything Josephine could have hoped for in a husband. He was patient and kind, passionate and devoted. He never dismissed her ideas or told her she was asking too many questions. When she suggested improvements to the ranch, he listened carefully and often implemented them. When she wanted to start a small garden, he helped her prepare the soil. When she expressed interest in learning to handle cattle better, he taught her with the same patience he showed his horses. They worked together, played together, loved together. At night, they would lie in bed and talk for hours, sharing dreams and fears and everything in between. Thomas told her about his childhood, about his father's dreams for the ranch, about the loneliness he had felt before she came into his life. Josephine told him about growing up with parents who had loved her but never quite understood her, about the frustration of being a woman in a world that did not value her mind. "You are the smartest person I know," Thomas told her one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I mean that. You see things other people miss. You make connections nobody else makes. That is a gift, Josephine. My family always made me feel like it was a curse. Then your family was wrong. Your mind is beautiful. Everything about you is beautiful." Their first Christmas together was magical. They decorated the house with pine boughs and made cookies together, flour ending up in places flour had no business being. Thomas gave Josephine a beautiful leather-bound journal, telling her he wanted her to write down all her questions and thoughts. Josephine gave Thomas a new saddle she had saved for, and he looked at it like she had given him the moon on Christmas Eve. As they sat by the fire drinking hot cider, Thomas said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "I want to expand the ranch. Take on more cattle, maybe some sheep. Build another barn. It would be a lot of work and we would have to take out a loan, but I think we could do it. If you agree, that is. This is your ranch too now." Josephine felt a surge of love for this man who always included her in decisions. "I think it is a wonderful idea. We should draw up a plan, figure out exactly what we need. I can help with the books, manage the money side of things. See, this is why I married you. You are not just beautiful and kind. You are smart and capable, and you make me better." "We make each other better," Josephine corrected, kissing him. They spent the winter months planning the expansion, working through the details together. Josephine discovered she had a head for numbers and business, and Thomas relied on her more and more to handle the financial aspects of the ranch. She corresponded with buyers, negotiated prices, kept meticulous records. Under their joint management, the ranch began to thrive. Spring came, and with it, new life. The cattle calved, the horses foaled, and Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they were watching the sunset from the porch, his arm around her shoulders. "Thomas, I have news. Good news, I hope, the best news. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town and pulled her into his arms, careful not to squeeze too tight. "A baby. We are having a baby. Josephine, you have made me the happiest man alive. Are you ready to be a father? I do not know if anyone is ever really ready, but I cannot wait to try. Boy or girl, it does not matter to me, as long as you are both healthy. What if the baby is like me? Asking questions constantly, never satisfied with simple answers," Thomas laughed. "Then we will be in trouble, but wonderful trouble. I hope the baby is exactly like you." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Thomas hovered like a worried mother hen. He insisted she rest more, took on extra work himself, and generally drove her crazy with his concern. But Josephine could not really be angry when his worry came from such deep love. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared a room for the baby, painting it a cheerful yellow. Mrs. Brennan and Mrs. Dalton threw Josephine a party, showering her with gifts and advice. The women of Parowan had fully accepted her as one of their own, and their support meant the world to her. On a cold November night in 1877, just over a year since Josephine had been left in the desert, she went into labor. Thomas rode to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Carson, while Charlie and Henry paced nervously outside. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Thomas held Josephine's hand the entire time, whispering encouragement, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold and bright, and Josephine felt a love so fierce it stole her breath. "A boy," Mrs. Carson announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a blanket. "A healthy boy." She placed the baby in Josephine's arms, and Josephine stared down at the tiny, red, perfect face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Thomas was crying, tears running down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect." "Josephine, he is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy. "What do you think about James?" Josephine asked. "After your father, James Cartwright," Thomas said, testing it out. "Yes, James it is." The weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Josephine had known babies were work, but the reality was more intense than she had imagined. James had a good set of lungs and was not shy about using them. But every time she looked at his little face, every time Thomas held him with such careful tenderness, Josephine felt her heart expand. Thomas was a devoted father from the beginning. He helped with night feedings, changed diapers without complaint, and could often be found just staring at James in wonder. "I cannot believe we made this," he would say. "He is a miracle." As James grew, he revealed a personality that was equal parts both his parents. He had Thomas's steady temperament but Josephine's endless curiosity. As soon as he could talk, the questions began. Why is the sky blue? Where do the cows go at night? How does the water get from the creek to our house? Thomas and Josephine answered every question as thoroughly as they could, encouraging his natural inquisitiveness. "He is going to be just like his mother," Thomas said one evening, watching 3-year-old James examine a beetle with intense concentration. "Always asking why, always wanting to understand." "Is that a problem?" Josephine asked, though she was smiling. "Not even a little bit. I love it. I love him. I love you. I love this life we have built. Even though it is not what you expected when you found a stubborn woman in the desert." Thomas pulled her close. "Especially because of that. You were the best surprise of my life, Josephine Cartwright." The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. The ranch prospered under their management. They added another barn, expanded their herds, and became known throughout the territory for the quality of their cattle. Josephine proved to have a shrewd business sense, and Thomas relied on her judgment more and more. They were true partners in every sense of the word. When James was 4, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882 they welcomed a daughter. She was smaller than James had been, with dark hair like her mother and her father's gray eyes. They named her Rose, because Josephine said she was as precious and beautiful as the wild roses that grew near the creek. Rose was a happy baby, easier than James had been, and Josephine marveled at how different two children from the same parents could be. Where James was serious and curious, Rose was cheerful and adventurous. But both children were loved beyond measure, and both thrived in the warmth of their parents' devotion. Thomas proved to be an exceptional father. He was patient and playful, teaching his children about the ranch and the land, answering their endless questions with the same patience he had always shown Josephine. He never talked down to them or dismissed their concerns. He treated them with respect, and they adored him for it. One evening, when James was 6 and Rose was 2, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. James was asking about the stars, and Thomas was explaining constellations. Rose was on Josephine's lap, fighting sleep. It was such an ordinary moment, but Josephine felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing her expression. "Just how lucky I am. How different my life could have been if I had not been left in that desert, if you had not found me." "I was the lucky one," Thomas said. "I was going through the motions before you came along, just working, just surviving. You taught me how to really live. I did not do anything special, I just asked questions. You did everything special. You saw possibilities where I saw only problems. You believed in me and in us. You made this ranch a home. You gave me a family. Josephine, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." She leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to disturb Rose. "I love you, Thomas Cartwright. I love you too, always and forever." 2 years later, when James was 8 and Rose was 4, Josephine gave birth to their third and final child, another son they named William. He was a big baby, healthy and strong, with Thomas's dark hair and Josephine's hazel eyes. With 3 children, the house was never quiet, always full of noise and laughter and life. The children grew up wild and free on the ranch, learning to ride before they could read, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough to be useful. Thomas and Josephine raised them with love and firm guidance, teaching them the value of hard work, the importance of kindness, and the power of curiosity. James, true to his nature, was fascinated by everything. He wanted to know how things worked, why things were the way they were. Thomas taught him about ranching, but Josephine also made sure he had books, encouraged his reading, fostered his natural intelligence. Rose was fearless, always climbing trees or riding too fast or getting into mischief. She kept her parents on their toes. William was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, following his older siblings everywhere. Charlie and Henry remained with the ranch, becoming like family over the years. They were Uncle Charlie and Uncle Henry to the children, always good for a story or a treat. Mrs. Brennan and the Daltons were frequent visitors, along with many other friends they had made in Parowan over the years. The Cartwright Ranch became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where strangers were offered food and rest, where neighbors came in times of trouble. As the children grew older, Thomas and Josephine made sure to instill in them the values they held dear. They taught them to treat everyone with respect, regardless of station or background. They taught them to question authority when something seemed wrong, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. They taught them that being curious was not a flaw but a strength. "Your mother was left in the desert because she asked too many questions," Thomas told them one evening when James was 12, Rose was 8, and William was 6. "And do you know what I said to her the first time I met her?" "What, Papa?" William asked, eyes wide. "I said, you ask good questions. Keep asking them, because questions are how we learn. Questions are how we grow. Never let anyone make you feel bad for wanting to understand the world." "Is that why you fell in love with Mama?" Rose asked. "Because she asked questions." Thomas looked at Josephine, his eyes full of love after 15 years of marriage. "I fell in love with your mother because she was brave and smart and beautiful and herself. The questions were just part of who she was, and I loved all of her." "Still do," Thomas added, reaching for Josephine's hand. The children made faces at their parents' affection, but they were smiling. They had grown up surrounded by love, had never questioned that their parents adored each other and them. It was simply the foundation of their world. Time continued its steady march. James grew into a thoughtful young man, tall and lean like his father, with his mother's quick mind. At 16, he announced that he wanted to go to college, wanted to study engineering. Thomas and Josephine supported him fully, even though it meant he would leave the ranch. They had always known their children would make their own paths. Rose, at 12, was already showing signs of being a force of nature. She could rope and ride as well as any man, had a fearless streak a mile wide, and a good heart underneath all the bravado. William, at 10, was still young enough to be content with life on the ranch, but Josephine could see the artist in him. He was always drawing, always observing, capturing the world around him on paper. One evening in the summer of 1892, Thomas and Josephine sat together on the porch after the children had gone to bed. Thomas was now 41, Josephine 38, and they had been married for 16 years. The ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy and happy, and they had built a life together that exceeded anything either of them had imagined. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had gotten on that wagon train?" Josephine asked. "If I had gone to California?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "And it terrifies me. The idea that I could have missed you, that you could have just been a story I heard once about a woman alone in the desert. I am so grateful you stayed, Josephine. I am grateful you gave me a reason to stay. Thomas, you saved my life that night, not just from dying in the desert, but from a life that would have been half-lived. You taught me that I did not have to choose between being myself and being loved, that I could have both. You taught me the same thing. Before you, I thought I was too set in my ways, too focused on the ranch to ever really connect with someone. You showed me I was wrong. You made me better in every way." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, listening to the night sounds of the ranch they had built together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The creek burbled over stones, the same creek where Thomas had once told Josephine he thought she would make a wonderful teacher. "You have any regrets?" Thomas asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "No. I have lived exactly the life I was meant to live. I found exactly the partner I was meant to find. If I had not been left in that desert, if you had not come along, if I had not stayed, none of this would exist. Our children would not exist. No, Thomas, I have no regrets at all, neither do I. Not a single one." As they sat there together, Josephine thought about the scared young woman she had been, standing alone in the desert, watching her wagon train disappear. She had felt so lost, so abandoned, but that moment had been the beginning of everything good in her life. Sometimes, she thought, the worst things that happen to us open doors to the best things. Sometimes being left behind is really being set free. The years continued to unfold. James left for college in Salt Lake City, writing long letters home about his studies and his excitement about engineering. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman, headstrong and capable, who scandalized the town by declaring she intended to run the ranch herself someday, rather than marry and leave it. William developed his artistic talents, selling paintings to visitors and dreaming of studying art in San Francisco. Thomas and Josephine grew older together with grace. Thomas's hair silvered at the temples, Josephine's developed threads of white. They weathered hard times, droughts, harsh winters, market crashes, and celebrated good times. They grew closer with each passing year, their love deepening into something rock solid and unshakable. They watched their children grow into adults and make their own choices. James finished college and took a job with a railroad company, designing bridges. He married a kind woman named Sarah, and they gave Thomas and Josephine their first grandchild in 1898. Rose did indeed take over much of the ranch management, proving to be as capable as her mother in business and as skilled as her father in ranching. She eventually married a man named Daniel who was smart enough to appreciate her strength rather than try to diminish it. William went to San Francisco to study art, and though he lived far away, he came home often, painting the landscapes of his childhood with love and skill. As Thomas and Josephine entered their 50s and then their 60s, they slowed down but never stopped. They handed more responsibility to Rose and Daniel, but they remained active in the ranch and the community. They were respected elders in Parowan, known for their fairness and wisdom. Young couples came to them for advice. People trusted their judgment. One evening in the autumn of 1906, 30 years after Josephine had been left in the desert, she and Thomas sat in the same spot on the porch where they had sat so many times before. They were both gray now, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But Thomas still looked at Josephine with the same love in his eyes that had been there when he was 28 and she was 22. "We did good, did we not?" Thomas said. "With the children, with the ranch, with everything, we did very good," Josephine agreed. "I am proud of what we built, Thomas, not just the ranch, but the family, the life. We raised good people who know how to think for themselves, because they had a good example in their mother. A woman who was never afraid to ask questions, who taught them that curiosity was a virtue." Josephine leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over 3 decades. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night? When I told you I would always have more questions, I said, ask me anything, and I meant it. You have never once made me feel like I was too much, too curious, too opinionated, too anything. You have loved me exactly as I am for 30 years. "It has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Thomas said simply. "Loving you has always been easy, Josephine. It was finding you that was hard." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Utah sky in shades of orange and purple and red, the same colors that had filled the sky the night they met. They had lived a full life together, had raised children and built a legacy. They had loved each other through everything life threw at them, and they had never wavered. "I hope we have many more years," Josephine said softly. "I am not ready to be done with you yet." "We will have as many as we are given," Thomas replied, "and I will treasure every single one." They did have more years, not as many as they might have wished, perhaps, but good years nonetheless. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed more as James and Rose and William had children of their own. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays surrounded by family. They continued to work the ranch until their bodies finally told them it was time to rest. Thomas passed first in the winter of 1912, at the age of 61. It was peaceful in his sleep, with Josephine beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she was grateful that he had not suffered, that he had lived a full and happy life. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in Parowan and beyond. Person after person stood up to talk about Thomas's kindness, his integrity, his dedication to his family. But it was Josephine's eulogy that had everyone in tears. "Thomas Cartwright found me in the desert 36 years ago," she said, her voice strong despite her grief. "I was alone and frightened, and I had been left behind because I asked too many questions. Thomas did not see my questions as a flaw. He saw them as a strength. He said to me, "Ask me anything," and he meant it. For 30 years of marriage, he never once made me feel like I was less than I was. He loved me, he supported me, he built a life with me. He was the best man I have ever known, and I will spend the rest of my days grateful that our paths crossed. I love you, Thomas. I will love you forever. Josephine lived another 6 years without Thomas. Years that were harder than she would have admitted. But she was surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, and she found purpose in sharing her stories, in making sure the next generation understood the values she and Thomas had held dear. She told them about being left in the desert, about a young cowboy who had said, "Ask me anything," about building a life together through love and hard work and mutual respect. In the spring of 1918, Josephine passed away in her sleep at the age of 64. She was buried next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her children made sure the gravestone read, "She asked the right questions and found all the right answers." The ranch continued, passed down through the family, generation after generation. The story of Josephine and Thomas became legend in Parowan, the tale of a woman left behind who found something better, of a man who saw strength where others saw inconvenience, of a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And though decades passed, and the world changed in ways neither of them could have imagined, their legacy remained. They had taught their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that questions were important, that curiosity was valuable, that love meant accepting someone completely for who they were. They had shown, through the example of their lives, that the best relationships were built on respect and partnership, on seeing and celebrating each other's strengths rather than trying to diminish them. The story of how they met, of Josephine alone in the desert and Thomas riding up in the darkness, of her asking too many questions and him saying, "Ask me anything," was told and retold, taking on the quality of myth. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. Sometimes being left behind is really being set free. And sometimes, when you meet the right person, you just know. Josephine Crawford had been left in the desert because she asked too many questions. Thomas Cartwright had found her there and loved her for it. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Together, they had lived a love story for the ages. And though they were gone, their story lived on, a testament to the power of acceptance, the beauty of curiosity, and the enduring strength of true love. In the end, it was not about the destination Josephine had been seeking when she set out for California. It was about the journey that brought her to exactly where she needed to be. It was about a man who saw her, really saw her, and chose to love her exactly as she was. It was about building a life together, one question and one answer at a time. It was about forever.